Let me see those beautiful faces, everybody. I love seeing your faces. It makes me so happy. Hudson, that's not your face. That's a guy from Family Guy. I want to see your face. Kyle, Maya, Rael, let me see those beautiful faces. Maya, where's your face? If I don't see your face, I'm marking you absent. Deems, face. Kyle, face. Michael, Aaliyah, face. Holly, I've heard Holly, Alexia. I'm still waiting on Michael and Maya. Oh, Maya, I already saw you.
My computer was frozen.
Okay. All right. Michael, say something. There's his face. Okay, Maya, you're good. Okay. All right. How are we all doing? Oh, all right. So I was so cold, I had to borrow a heater. Did I tell you that already? It was so cold in here. My hands were turning blue. So be glad you're at home in a nice, toasty, warm house while I'm freezing to death in our empty, bleak classroom. Okay, enough about my problems. All right, so today, what I want to do is I want to talk about, pardon me, chapter 4. I have uploaded some things to D2L. I'm going to share those with you right now. The first one is the chapter 4 booklet. Aaliyah, if you can see the booklet, can you just give me a thumbs up? Perfect. All right. I want to bring your attention to this section here, the one with the map. So this deals with the treaties, the historical treaties between Canada and the First Nations. Now, on page 124 in your booklet, there is a map of the treaties, and what you're going to do with this map is you're going to draw the treaties on the map and you're going to color them, and then you're going to complete this chart. You're going to tell me the color that you used for the treaty number, the date the treaty was signed, and the provinces that were included. So for example, if I was to do Treaty 7, I would put red, Treaty 7, the date it was signed was 1877, and the provinces that were included was Southern Alberta. Okay, so you do that for all of them. And I believe there are 11 numbered treaties. Okay, is everybody clear on that? Yes, no, maybe so, haven't really thought about it. Yes, no, everybody's good. Give me the thumbs up if you're good. Logan, good. All right. Okay. Good. Okay, so the rest of the booklet is pretty straightforward. Just some questions and answers. I will create a Dropbox that you can put this in. You can either download the document, answer the questions in the document, and then put the document back into the Dropbox. Or you can print it off at home if you have a printer, answer the questions by hand, take pictures of all the pages, and send me the pages, okay? It's totally up to you, whatever you decide. All right, you with me, Jackson? Okay. Okay, so the other thing that I shared with you was the chapter 4 vocabulary sheet. So that's this one here. Allie, give me a thumbs up if you can see the chapter. Okay, thank you. Same as always, you need to do the book definition. So that is in the glossary. If it's not in the glossary, you look at the index. If it's not in the index, then you can Google it and then create your own in your own words. On Friday, I'm going to probably put together a little quick quiz. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, if I'm going to do it on D2L or if we're going to do it during our Zoom. Okay? I was thinking maybe have like a little contest in our Zoom, see who wins it, but we'll see. Okay? All right. Any questions on either of those two things? So you should finish up the vocabulary sheet first, and then you can work on the chapter 4 booklet. Okay. Mason, I sent you back a reply. Okay. All right, now what I want to do is I want to go over the introductory PowerPoint for this chapter. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about collective rights and what those collective rights look like in Canada, okay? So, Kaylee, if you can see the PowerPoint, can you give me a thumbs up? Thank you. Oops, this is wrong. Wait. All right. So, pardon me. In chapter 3, we talked about individual rights and what individual rights are, okay? But there's also another set of rights that are protected by the Constitution, and that's collective rights. And collective rights are rights that groups hold. So your individual rights deal with you specifically, okay? Collective rights deal more so with groups of people. Now, before we start talking exactly about what collective rights are, there are a couple of definitions that you should need to understand. And the first definition is affirm. So if you're affirming something, you're validating it and you're expressing a commitment to something. So when two people get married, they affirm their love to one another, okay? They affirm their commitment to the relationship, all right? The next word here is collective identity. So everybody knows what their own individual identity is, okay? But most people have a collective identity based on shared identity with other groups. So for example, Ali, you're a dancer. That's part of your individual identity, but it's also part of your collective identity because you belong to a dance studio. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Sharon, where's Sharon? There you are. You are from Venezuela, is that right? No, where are you from?
Mexico.
You need to unmute.
Mexico.
Mexico, sorry, my bad. All right, so, but you're from Mexico, so that's part of your collective identity. Do you speak the language?
Yes.
Yes, and there are certain customs that your family probably celebrates that maybe other people around you don't celebrate because they're not, their heritage isn't Mexican. So that's part of your collective identity. Does that make sense to you? Hopefully. Where'd she go? She disappeared on me. Where'd she go? Sharon, are you there? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. You just disappeared from my screen for a second. All right. So does anybody have any questions on what a collective identity is? Speak now or forever hold your peace, my little minions. No? Okay, good. All right. Now, in Canada, there are 3 groups of people that have collective rights that are guaranteed by law, okay? And they're the Francophones, the Anglophones, and our Aboriginal peoples. So these 3 groups have collective rights that are outlined for them in certain pieces of legislation. So Tara, when you look at this mind map here, what piece of legislation, so the legislation acts are all in pink, which legislation do you see that affects all of our groups of people? So the Francophones, the Anglophones, and the Aboriginals. Whoever's writing on my screen, stop it.
Wouldn't it be the Canada's Constitution?
That's exactly what it is. So all of them have that piece of legislation. Whoever wrote on my screen, erase it now. Not happy, grade 9s. This is elementary behavior. Okay, so what you will notice though is that when we look at our Aboriginal peoples, when we break those down into the 3 subgroups, the First Nation, the Métis, and the Inuit, you'll notice that they have different pieces of legislation. So for example, the First Nations have the Indian Act. The Métis and the Inuit don't have the Indian Act. The First Nations have historical and modern treaties. The Métis and the Inuit only have modern treaties. And then finally, the Métis has the Manitoba Act. The First Nations and the Inuit do not have the Manitoba Act, okay? And when you look at the Francophones and Anglophones, they only have the Constitution that guarantees their collective rights. Any questions on that? All right. So the question then is, and I'm going to, let's see, who am I going to pick on? Let's see. Let's see who looks extremely bored. We'll go with Holly. Okay, Holly, why do these 3 groups have guaranteed collective rights and no other groups in Canada do? Do you remember from grade 7?
I do not, but
You don't.
if I may guess, I would say because there are 3 main groups.
They're what, sorry?
Our 3 main groups.
Yes, you're on the right track. These are the 3 groups that help establish Canada as a country. These are the first 3 groups that lived in Canada. And when it came time to write Canada's Constitution, these 3 groups had to come to a consensus. How were they going to live together peacefully? Now, all 3 of these groups have differences. The biggest difference, of course, being between the First Nations, or the FNMIs, and the Europeans. But there's also differences between the French and the English. What do you think is the biggest difference between the French and the English? I'm gonna pick on, who am I gonna pick on today? Now, Lana. What is the biggest difference between the French and the English, do you think? You need to take your mute off.
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, the French and the English, it tells you right in their titles.
Their language?
Their language, that's the only difference. I mean, they were both Christians. They were both from Europe. The main difference between them was their language, okay? But do you think, Cheyenne, do you think there were more differences between the First Nations and the English and French?
I don't know, maybe.
Think about it. Do you think the First Nations were the same as the French and English?
No.
No, they had a lot of differences, didn't they? The first one, of course, being their language, but they also had a different way of living. Some of them were nomadic. They were still hunters and gatherers. They had very different religious way of life. They were much more in tune with Mother Nature and the earth. Okay, so there were very big differences. And so what they needed to do is they needed to come up with a way that they could all live together peacefully. And that's where you get this idea of collective rights from. Okay, any questions there? All right, Rael, are you facing the wrong way? I'd like to see your face and not just a moving chair. Or are you like Darth Vadering it? Okay, Then we can look at, when we look at our Aboriginal people, there are different categories of Aboriginal people. When we use the term Aboriginal people, we're talking about the collective name for all the Indigenous people in North America. So that includes the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit. So when I say Aboriginal people, I'm including all of those groups. If I say First Peoples, that's the collective name for the Indigenous peoples of North America. So the First Nations and the Inuit. Mila, why are the Métis not included in this group?
Because they were like a mix. I don't know.
Yeah, because they're part French, right? They weren't indigenous to the North America. Part of their ancestry is from Europe, so they can't be considered First Peoples. Then we have what we call the First Nations. And this is for all of the people, all of the Aboriginal people who are not Métis or Inuit. So all the other groups, they are First Nations. And then finally, we have, whoops, I missed it. Did I miss one? No, not yet. Now, we've talked about the term Indian. Indian is not an accurate description of our Aboriginal or First Nations people. Indian is the way you describe people from where? Lexi.
From India?
From India, right. So oftentimes people refer to our Aboriginals as Indian, and that's not really right, and it's not a favorable term. Instead, they should be referred to as Indigenous people, or First Nations, or Inuit, or Métis, depending on the group in which they belong to. Then finally, we have the Inuit people. Now, oftentimes the Inuit people are referred to as Eskimos. Eskimos is not an appropriate name for them. They're not Eskimos, they're Inuit, okay? And they live in the Arctic region of North America. So like in the Arctic Circle, up by Nunavut, okay? They would be living up in the Northwest Territories, okay? All right. So then, what are the Métis? Well, the Métis, of course, are the descendants of the Europeans and First Nations coming together and having children. And the Métis have a very, very strong sense of identity. They could have gone one of three ways. They could have really identified with the First Nations. They could have really identified with the Europeans, or they could have charted their own course. And that's what they did. The Métis Nation is a nation of people who are proud of their First Nation roots, but also embrace their French identity with their language, okay? And they have this thing called Métis Nation, which is a very strong collective identity. Any questions so far? No? All right. So we've already talked about who have collective rights, the Aboriginals. Guys, stop writing on my screen. It's really starting to tick me off. The collective groups are Francophones, Anglophones, and First Nations. Remember, collective rights are separate from individual rights. We've already talked about all this. Okay, so this, we've already talked about all this, so we don't have to go through that again. Do you guys have a clear understanding of what collective rights are? Who has collective rights in Canada? And why they have collective rights? We haven't talked about specifically what those collective rights are, but you should understand who has them and why they have them and what they are, like what the definition of collective rights are, okay? Do you guys have any questions on this? Okay, remember that you have your quiz on chapter 3 on Thursday, okay? And that'll be during your Zoom call. Any other questions?
How many questions is the test on Thursday?
I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
Probably no more than 30. Okay.
All right.
Nothing else? So I can say, all right, you guys are good to go. You can work on your stuff for the next hour or however long. And I will
Yeah.
see you back here tomorrow,
When's the assignment that you gave us due?
Friday.
Will the Dropbox be open on Friday?
It should be open now, is it not? I will check.
I didn't see it.
All right, I'll check. And if it's not, I'll open it right now. As soon as we're done here, okay? Anybody else? All right, then I'm gonna say adios.